Blood soaked through the torn hem of Lyra Ashwood's dress as she stumbled through the black trees, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her throat. Behind her, the howls grew louder, closer. She pressed a trembling hand against her stomach, not from pain, but from something far more precious she was trying to protect. Her unborn pup, the only thing left of a love that had turned to ash in a single night. 3 days ago, she had stood in the great hall of the Ashwood Kingdom, dressed in silver silk, waiting to be named Luna before hundreds of witnesses. She remembered the warmth of the fire torches, the scent of blooming night jasmine, and the steady thrum of her heart as she watched Alpha King Kalen Vane walk toward her across the polished stone floor. He had looked at her the way he always did, like she was the only person in the room worth seeing. Then everything shattered. Kalen's eyes had gone cold, distant, as if a stranger had slipped behind them and taken control of his voice. He called her a traitor, a spy sent by a rival pack to destroy him from within. He said words that cut deeper than any blade, words she still heard echoing in her mind as she ran through the forest now, wounded and alone. He had ordered her removed from his sight, and when she tried to speak, tried to remind him of every promise he had whispered against her skin, the guards had dragged her away, while he watched with an expression she never wanted to see again. She had not fought him then. She had been too stunned, too broken to understand how the man she loved could turn into someone she did not recognize. It was only after the guards threw her outside the kingdom walls, after the gates slammed shut behind her, that the truth began to claw its way into her mind. Something had been wrong with him. His eyes had not simply been angry, they had been empty, like a puppet moved by unseen strings. But understanding the truth did not change her situation. She had no pack now, no protection, and enemies of the Ashwood Kingdom would see her as an easy target, a way to hurt the Alpha King who had cast her aside. Rogue wolves from the borderlands had picked up her scent within a day, drawn by the promise of an unprotected Omega wandering without a pack's claim. She had been running from them ever since, surviving on nothing but fear, and the fierce need to keep her child alive. The howls behind her multiplied. She could hear paws crashing through the underbrush, gaining on her with every second. Lyra pushed herself harder, ignoring the sharp pain radiating from her ribs where a rogue's claws had caught her the night before. Her vision blurred at the edges. She was losing too much blood, and her body, exhausted from days without proper food or rest, was beginning to fail her. She broke through a line of trees and found herself at the edge of a wide, dark river. The water rushed loud and cold, carrying broken branches downstream in a current far too strong to swim against. There was no bridge, no way across. She turned, her back to the water, and watched as 5 pairs of glowing eyes emerged from the tree line, closing the distance with slow, deliberate steps. "Little Omega," one of the rogues said, his voice rough and mocking as he shifted just enough to speak, his massive gray form still crouched low to the ground. Nowhere left to run. Lyra's hand curled protectively over her stomach. She would not let them touch her child. She had nothing left, no weapons, no pack, no mate to call for help. But she still had her voice, and she used it, letting out a sound that was part scream and part warning, hoping against hope that something, anything, would hear her and come. The rogues laughed, unimpressed by her defiance. The largest of them stepped forward, jaws parting to reveal teeth stained with the memory of old battles. Lyra closed her eyes and thought of Kalen, not the cold stranger who had rejected her, but the man who used to trace gentle patterns on her palm while they watched the sunset from the highest tower of his kingdom. She thought of the nursery they had begun to plan together, the tiny wooden cradle he had built with his own hands, insisting that no craftsman could love their child the way he already did. A sudden roar tore through the clearing, so loud it shook the leaves from the nearest branches. A massive black wolf, easily twice the size of the rogues surrounding her, crashed through the tree line and slammed into the largest attacker, with enough force to send him tumbling into the river. The remaining rogues scattered in confusion, unsure whether to fight or flee from this new and terrifying threat. Lyra staggered backward, unsure if she should be afraid of this new arrival or grateful for the distraction. The black wolf turned toward her, golden eyes catching the moonlight, and for a brief, dizzying moment, she thought she saw something familiar in the way he held himself, proud and commanding despite the chaos around him. He shifted back to his human form in one fluid motion, revealing a tall man with sharp features, and dark hair that fell across his forehead. He wore no crest, no marking to identify which kingdom he served, and his expression carried none of the warmth she remembered from Kaelin's face. This was a stranger, cold and calculating, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're trespassing on Dravenland," he said, his voice low and even, carrying an authority that left no room for argument. Lyra's breath caught. Dravenland, the enemy kingdom. The sworn rival of everything Kaelin ruled, locked in a conflict that had lasted longer than she had been alive. She had run so far, so blindly, that she had crossed straight into the one place she should never have gone. "Please," she whispered, her strength finally giving out as her knees buckled beneath her. "I am not here to cause harm. I only need shelter, just for tonight." The stranger studied her for a long moment, his eyes tracing the blood on her dress, the bruises along her arms, the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. Something flickered behind his gaze, though she could not tell if it was suspicion or something closer to concern. "You wear the Ashwood colors," he said slowly, recognition dawning in his expression. "You belong to Kaelin Vane." Lyra flinched at the name, the sound of it like a fresh wound reopening. "Not anymore," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "He cast me out. I have nowhere else to go." The stranger's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Lyra feared he would simply turn and leave her there, or worse, drag her back, to face whatever punishment awaited a wolf who dared cross into enemy territory uninvited. Instead, he crouched down in front of her, studying her face with an unreadable expression. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, "and not think this is some trick devised by your king to spy on my kingdom?" "Because I have nothing left to gain from lying," Lyra said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, as the weight of everything she had lost crashed over her at once. "I have lost my home, my mate, my pack. I am running for my life, and I do not care where the shelter comes from, as long as it keeps my child safe." The word hung in the air between them. The stranger's eyes dropped briefly to her stomach, and something shifted in his expression, a calculation forming behind his gaze that she could not begin to understand. "Your child," he repeated quietly. Lyra nodded, too exhausted to explain further, too afraid of what admitting the truth might cost her. She did not know this man, did not know if revealing that she carried the heir to the Ashwood throne would make her more valuable to him or more dangerous. But she was too weak to keep secrets any longer, and the darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading, threatening to swallow her whole. "Please," she said again, the word barely audible. "I only need somewhere safe, just until I can find another way." The stranger rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping the tree line where the surviving rogues still lingered at a distance, waiting to see what would happen next. He let out a low growl that sent them scattering deeper into the forest, unwilling to challenge whatever authority radiated from him. "You will come with me," he said finally, extending a hand toward her. "Not out of kindness, understand that. But an Ashwood Omega, carrying Kaelin Vane's child, is not something I can simply leave lying in the dirt at my border." Lyra hesitated, fear and desperation warring inside her. She did not know what this man intended, whether he saw her as a guest or a prisoner, a bargaining piece or a burden. But the alternative was certain death, either from the rogues who still circled nearby, or from the blood loss that was slowly stealing her strength. She reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt a strange jolt, not the warm recognition she had once felt with Kaelin, but something sharper, more unsettling, like static crackling beneath her skin. The stranger seemed to feel it too, his eyes narrowing slightly, before he pulled her carefully to her feet, steadying her when her legs threatened to give out again. "What is your name?" she asked, as he guided her toward the trees, away from the river and the lingering threat of the rogues. He glanced back at her, his expression still guarded, still unreadable. "Ronan Draven." The name settled over her like a stone dropping into still water. The alpha king of the kingdom that had spent generations locked in bitter war with everything she once called home. She had crawled out of one nightmare, only to place herself directly in the hands of another. And yet, as exhaustion finally overtook her, and darkness closed in around the edges of her vision, she found herself gripping his hand a little tighter, some instinct, deep inside her, recognizing that whatever waited for her within the walls of the Draven kingdom, it was still safer than the fate that had been waiting for her at the river's edge. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away entirely was Ronan's low voice, murmuring something to the wolves that had gathered silently around them, guards who had arrived too late to witness the encounter, but quickly fell into formation around their king. She could not make out his words, but she felt herself lifted into strong arms, carried away from the river, away from the rogues, and deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Far away, within the walls of the Ashwood Kingdom, Caelan Vane stood alone on his balcony, staring out at the same moon that watched over Lyra's flight. Something had been gnawing at him for days, a fog lifting slowly from his mind, revealing fragmented memories of that terrible night that did not feel entirely his own. He remembered raising his voice, remembered the words of betrayal leaving his mouth, but the emotions behind them felt distant, as though he had been watching himself from far away, powerless to stop his own actions. He gripped the stone railing until his knuckles turned white, a terrible suspicion beginning to form in the back of his mind. He had not simply lost his temper that night. Something had been done to him, some influence he could not yet name, and somewhere out there, the woman he loved was suffering the consequences of a truth he was only beginning to uncover. "Lyra," he whispered into the empty night, unaware of how far she had already traveled, unaware that she now rested within the very walls of his greatest enemy, carrying the child that would soon change the fate of two warring kingdoms forever. Lyra woke to unfamiliar warmth, the softness of a bed beneath her aching body, and the distant crackle of a fireplace filling the silence with a gentle rhythm. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed the entire ordeal, that she would open her eyes and find herself back in her old chambers within the Ashwood Kingdom, safe and untouched by betrayal. But when her eyes finally opened, the room around her was unfamiliar, decorated in deep shades of gray and midnight blue, nothing like the golds and creams she had grown up surrounded by. She sat up too quickly, pain lancing through her ribs as a reminder of everything that had happened. A young woman with kind eyes and a healer's satchel slung over her shoulder rushed to her side, gently pressing her back against the pillows. "Easy now," the healer said softly. "You have been through a great deal. My name is Fira. I have been tending to your wounds since King Draven brought you here 2 nights ago." 2 nights. Lyra's mind raced to catch up with the passage of time she had lost. "Where am I exactly?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "You are within the walls of Castle Ravenmoor," Fira said, checking the bandages wrapped around Lyra's ribs with practiced hands. "The heart of the Draven Kingdom." The weight of those words pressed down on Lyra's chest. She was truly here, inside the stronghold of her mate's greatest enemy, surrounded by wolves, who had every reason to see her as a threat rather than a guest. She thought of the guards who must patrol these halls, the soldiers who had likely fought and lost family members in the endless conflict between the two kingdoms. How many of them would look at her crest, the Ashwood markings still faintly visible on the torn dress she had arrived in, and see only an enemy to be destroyed? "Does everyone know who I am?" Lyra asked carefully. Fira's expression grew cautious. "King Draven has kept the details private for now. Only a handful of trusted guards and myself know your identity. He believed it wiser to protect that information until he decided how to proceed." Lyra swallowed hard, unsure whether that decision comforted or terrified her. What did it mean for Ronan to be deciding how to proceed with her, as though she were a piece on a board rather than a person seeking simple shelter? She thought of the calculating look in his eyes when he had first learned of her pregnancy, the way his gaze had lingered on her stomach with something that felt less like sympathy and more like strategy forming behind his eyes. The door to the chamber opened without warning, and Ronan Draven stepped inside, filling the room with a presence that made the air feel heavier. He had changed from the rough traveling clothes she remembered from the forest, into a dark tunic that suited the authority radiating from him. His eyes swept over her, assessing, calculating, before he dismissed the healer with a small nod. Fira bowed and slipped out of the room, leaving Lyra alone with the Alpha King of Draven, for the first time since she had lost consciousness at his hand. "You are healing well," Ronan said, his tone unreadable, as he moved further into the room, though he kept a respectful distance from the bed. "Thanks to your healer," Lyra replied carefully, sitting up straighter, despite the discomfort it caused her. "I owe you a debt I am not sure how to repay." "We will discuss repayment later," Ronan said, and something about the phrasing sent a chill down her spine. "For now, I need to understand exactly what happened to you." Why would Kaelin Vane reject a mate carrying his own child, and cast her out to fend for herself among rogues and enemies? Lyra hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to a man whose intentions remained a mystery to her, but she had already placed her fate in his hands the moment she accepted his help at the river, and there was little point in withholding the truth now. "I do not fully understand it myself," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly as the memory resurfaced. "One moment he loved me, the next he looked at me as though I were a stranger, a traitor, sent to destroy him. His eyes were wrong, empty, as though someone else had taken control of him entirely." Ronan's expression sharpened at that detail, his posture going rigid. "Explain what you mean by wrong." "I do not know how else to describe it," Lyra said, frustration mixing with the exhaustion still weighing on her body. It was as if he was not truly present in his own mind. He spoke words I know he would never say to me, in a voice that sounded almost mechanical, detached from any real emotion. For a long moment, Ronan said nothing, his gaze distant, as though turning something over carefully in his mind. Lyra watched him, trying to read the thoughts hidden behind his composed exterior, but he gave nothing away. "There are old methods," he finally said, his voice quiet, "used by certain wolves, skilled in manipulation, capable of clouding another's mind, forcing them to act against their own will for a limited time. It is rare, forbidden in most kingdoms, including my own, but not impossible." Lyra's breath caught. "You believe someone did this to him? Someone forced him to reject me?" "I believe it is possible," Ronan said carefully, "though I have no reason to defend Kaelin Vane's character to you. Whatever the cause, the result remains the same. You are here, in my kingdom, carrying a child that could shift the balance of power between our two nations." The bluntness of his words stung more than she expected, a reminder that whatever kindness he had shown her at the river had been laced with calculation from the very beginning. "So that is all I am to you," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "A piece to be used in whatever game you are playing against Kaelin." Ronan's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, something almost like guilt flickered across his features before he masked it again. "I did not have to save you from those rogues," he said. "I did not have to bring you into my home, treat your wounds, or keep your identity hidden from those who might wish you harm. Do not mistake my caution for cruelty, Lyra Ashwood, but do not mistake my hospitality for something it is not, either. I am a king first. Everything I do carries consequences for my people." Lyra fell silent, unsure how to respond to the strange mixture of honesty and distance in his words. She understood duty, understood the weight of responsibility that came with ruling a kingdom, even if she had never carried a crown herself. But the reminder that she remained, in his eyes, primarily a valuable asset rather than a person deserving of simple compassion, left a hollow ache in her chest. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "For now, you remain here, under my protection," Ronan said. "You will not be permitted to leave the castle grounds until I better understand the full scope of what has happened, and what threats may follow you here. My people will be told you are a guest, recovering from an injury sustained while traveling, nothing more." "And if Kaelin comes looking for me?" Lyra asked, dread creeping into her voice at the thought of facing him again, whether as the man who had rejected her, or as the stranger controlled by some unknown force. Ronan's eyes darkened. "Then he will find that crossing into my territory carries a cost he will not enjoy paying." The certainty in his voice sent an unexpected shiver through her, not entirely born of fear. There was something magnetic about his conviction, the way he spoke as though he had already prepared for every possible outcome, every threat that might come through his gates. It was so different from the warmth she remembered from Kaelin, and yet it offered its own strange sense of security, the feeling that whatever storm might come, this man would stand firm against it. Over the following days, Lyra's strength slowly returned under Fira's careful attention. She was given a small chamber near the healer's quarters, modest but comfortable, with a window that overlooked a courtyard lined with silver birch trees. She spent her mornings resting, her afternoons slowly walking the length of the room to rebuild her strength, always aware of the guards stationed discreetly outside her door. Ronan visited infrequently, always brief, always focused on practical matters rather than personal conversation. He asked about her health, confirmed the guards remained vigilant, and left without lingering. Yet Lyra found herself noticing small things about him during these visits, The way his eyes softened slightly when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way his voice lost some of its hard edge when he asked about the baby's well-being, rather than the political implications of her presence. One evening, nearly a week after her arrival, Lyra found herself unable to sleep, her mind restless with worry about Kalen, about the strange fog that had seemed to control his actions, about the uncertain future stretching ahead of her and her unborn child. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way quietly to the courtyard below her window, drawn by the soft sound of running water from a fountain she had spotted during her walks. She found Ronan there already, sitting alone on a stone bench near the fountain, staring up at the night sky with an expression she had never seen on him before, something almost vulnerable beneath the usual mask of authority. He noticed her presence immediately, his posture straightening, though he did not send her away. "Trouble sleeping," he observed, gesturing for her to sit if she wished. Lyra hesitated only a moment before lowering herself onto the bench, careful to keep a respectful distance between them. "Too many thoughts," she admitted, "too many fears about what comes next." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, the sound of the fountain filling the silence between them. "You are safe here," he said eventually. "Whatever else you believe about my intentions, know that much is true." "Why?" Lyra asked, genuinely curious. "Why help me at all, when it would have been far simpler to turn me away at your border, or worse, use my presence as leverage against Kalen, without extending any kindness toward me personally?" Ronan considered the question carefully before answering. "Because whatever conflict exists between our kingdoms, whatever history of blood and war lies between the Ashwood and Draven names, none of that is your fault, nor the fault of the child you carry. I have seen enough suffering caused by pointless cruelty in my lifetime. I did not wish to add to it needlessly." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, softening something in her chest that she had thought permanently frozen since the night of her rejection. She studied his profile in the moonlight, the sharp lines of his face, the quiet strength radiating from him even in stillness, and found herself wondering how a man capable of such gentleness could also be the feared Alpha King, whose name alone struck fear into the hearts of Ashwood soldiers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything you have done, even if your reasons remain complicated." Ronan's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, the first genuine expression she had seen from him since their encounter at the river. "Complicated reasons are the only kind worth having," he said. "Simple ones rarely survive contact with the real world." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, watching the moonlight dance across the surface of the fountain, two people from opposing worlds finding an unexpected moment of peace amid the chaos surrounding them both. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the castle walls, a spy loyal to interests neither of them yet understood, already preparing to send word beyond the kingdom's borders that Lyra Ashwood was alive, and sheltering within the walls of her mate's greatest enemy. The spy moved through the darkness like smoke, slipping between the shadows of Castle Ravenmoor's outer wall with practiced ease. He had waited 11 days for an opportunity like this, watching, listening, gathering fragments of information that finally added up to something worth the danger of crossing back into Ashwood territory. What he had witnessed in the courtyard, the Alpha King of Draven, sitting beside the missing Ashwood Omega beneath the moonlight, spoke of far more than simple hospitality. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the spy had already crossed the border, his message carried not on parchment, but memorized word for word, meant for the ears of someone who had been anxiously awaiting news of Lyra Ashwood's whereabouts. He moved through the Ashwood Kingdom's outer villages, avoiding the main roads, until he reached the private study of a man whose loyalty had never truly belonged to the crown he served. Inside the castle, Kalen Vane had barely slept in the days since his memories began returning in broken, disjointed pieces. He sat now at the long table in his private chambers, surrounded by scattered notes and old records, searching desperately for any clue that might explain the fog that had consumed his mind on the night he rejected Lyra. His most trusted advisor, an older wolf named Idric who had served the Ashwood throne since before Kalen's birth, entered without knocking, his expression grave. "My king," Idric said, "we have received word." Kalen's head snapped up, exhaustion evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Word of what?" "Lyra," Idric said carefully. "She is alive. She has taken shelter within the Draven kingdom." The room seemed to tilt beneath Kalen's feet. He rose from his chair so quickly it clattered backward onto the stone floor. "Draven territory," he repeated. disbelief and fury warring in his voice. How is this possible? How did she cross so far? And why would Ronan Draven allow an Ashwood wolf sanctuary within his own walls? That is unclear, Edric said, though something in his tone suggested he was choosing his words with unusual care. Our source indicates she has been there for over a week, recovering from injuries sustained during her flight. There are also whispers, my king, that she carries your child. Kaelin's blood turned to ice. He had suspected as much in the fragmented memories that had begun resurfacing. Glimpses of Lyra's trembling hands pressed against her stomach during their final conversation before everything went wrong, though at the time, his mind had been too clouded to process the significance of the gesture. My child is in enemy territory, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. Growing up surrounded by wolves, who would see it destroyed the moment it proves inconvenient to their king's ambitions. We do not know Draven's intentions, Edric cautioned, though his words did little to calm the storm building behind Kaelin's eyes. I know enough, Kaelin snapped. I know that Ronan Draven has spent his entire reign searching for any advantage against my kingdom, and now fate has delivered him the perfect weapon, an heir to the Ashwood throne, born and raised within his walls, loyal to him rather than to me. Edric remained silent, watching his king pace the length of the chamber with barely restrained fury radiating from every movement. He had served 3 generations of Ashwood alphas, and he had never seen Kaelin this unsettled, this close to losing the careful control that had always defined his rule. There is something else you must consider, Edric finally said, his tone shifting to something more measured. You believe your rejection of Lyra was not entirely your own doing. If that suspicion proves true, someone within our own walls orchestrated this entire situation, driving her directly into Draven's arms through deliberate manipulation. Kaelin stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face his advisor fully. You believe this was planned from the beginning. I believe, Edric said carefully, that whoever clouded your mind that night understood exactly what the consequences would be. They knew Lyra would flee. They likely knew, or at least hoped, that her flight would lead her directly into the path of your greatest enemy, creating exactly the crisis we now face. The implications settled over Kaelin like a physical weight. If Edric's theory held true, then the true architect of his suffering, of Lyra's suffering, remained hidden somewhere within his own court, watching the chaos unfold with satisfaction, while Kaelin tore himself apart searching for answers in the wrong direction entirely. Find them, Kaelin said, his voice low and lethal. I do not care what resources it requires. What corners of this kingdom must be searched. I want to know who did this to me, who stole Lyra from my side, and I want them found, before I march on Draven territory, to reclaim what belongs to me. My king, Edric said carefully, marching against Draven now, without understanding the full scope of what has happened, could play directly into whoever's hands orchestrated this in the first place. If war between our kingdoms was the intended outcome all along, storming Draven's gates would only complete their plan. Kaelin's jaw clenched, torn between the burning need to reclaim Lyra and the cold logic of his advisor's warning. He had built his reign on careful strategy, on measured decisions that protected his people above all else. But every instinct in his body screamed at him to tear down whatever walls separated him from the woman he loved and the child he had not even known existed until moments ago. Then we will investigate quietly, Kaelin finally said, forcing himself to breathe through the rage threatening to consume him entirely. We will find the traitor within our own ranks before taking any action against Draven. But know this, Edric, my patience has limits. If I discover that Lyra or my child have come to any harm within those enemy walls, no strategy, no careful planning, will hold me back from bringing fire down upon Ronan Draven's entire kingdom. Edric bowed his head in acknowledgement, though worry remained etched into every line of his weathered face. He had watched Kaelin grow from a determined young pup into a formidable king, and he understood better than most the depths of devastation that Kaelin's fury could unleash, if provoked beyond reason. Over the following days, the investigation into Kaelin's manipulation moved forward in careful secrecy. Edric quietly questioned members of the court who had been present that fateful night, searching for any unusual behavior, any hint of foreign scent, or strange influence that might explain how someone had managed to cloud the mind of an alpha as powerful as Kaelin Vane. The trail led slowly, painfully, toward the Ashwood Kingdom's own healer's quarters, where certain herbs capable of manipulating a wolf's senses were known to be stored under careful lock and key. When Edric discovered that a small quantity of a rare, forbidden compound had gone missing in the days before Lyra's rejection, the pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Someone with access to the healer's private stores, someone trusted enough to move through those restricted areas without raising suspicion, had orchestrated the entire catastrophe. The list of individuals with that level of access was mercifully short, but each name Edric considered carried its own weight of betrayal, each one a member of Kaelin's inner circle who had, until this moment, been considered beyond reproach. Meanwhile, within the walls of Castle Ravenmoor, Lyra's bond with Ronan continued to develop in small, quiet moments that neither of them fully acknowledged as significant. He began visiting more frequently, his conversations extending beyond simple inquiries about her health into longer discussions about the histories of their respective kingdoms, the complicated politics that had shaped both their lives, and eventually, tentatively, about themselves as individuals, rather than symbols of opposing thrones. Lyra learned that Ronan had lost his own mother during a raid on the Draven border when he was young, an event that had shaped his ruthless dedication to protecting his kingdom above all else. She learned that beneath his cold exterior lay a man who genuinely cared for his people, who visited the sick within his villages personally, who remembered the names of even the lowest-ranking guards within his castle walls. In turn, she found herself opening up about her own childhood, about growing up as the daughter of a minor Ashwood lord, about the dreams she had once held of a peaceful life away from the pressures of court politics, before falling in love with Kaelin had thrust her directly into the heart of everything she had once hoped to avoid. "Do you regret it?" Ronan asked her one evening, as they sat together in the castle's private library, surrounded by shelves of ancient texts that Lyra found herself drawn to during her long hours of confinement. Loving him, given everything that has happened. Lyra considered the question carefully, her hand resting instinctively on the gentle curve of her stomach, where her pup continued to grow despite everything working against them both. "I regret the pain," she admitted honestly. "I regret the betrayal, whether it was truly his choice or the result of some manipulation beyond his control. But I cannot regret loving him, not when that love gave me this child, the one piece of light remaining in all this darkness." Ronan's expression softened at her words, something unguarded flickering across his features, before he quickly masked it again. "You are stronger than most wolves I have encountered," he said quietly. "Carrying so much weight, so much uncertainty, and yet you continue moving forward regardless." "What choice do I have?" Lyra replied with a small, tired smile. "Surrendering to despair would help no one, least of all the child depending on me to survive whatever comes next." Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the library door, followed by the entrance of one of Ronan's senior guards, his expression tight with urgency. "My king," the guard said, "forgive the intrusion, but we have received troubling news from our scouts along the eastern border." Ronan rose immediately, his relaxed posture vanishing instantly as the mantle of authority settled back over him. "What news?" "Ashwood forces have been spotted moving unusually close to our territory," the guard reported. "Not a full invasion, but scouting parties, larger than typical border patrols. It appears King Vane may already suspect the Omega's location." Lyra's heart dropped as she processed the implications. If Kaelin already knew she was here, if he was already moving his forces toward Draven territory, then whatever fragile piece she had found within these walls was about to be tested in ways she was not prepared to face. She thought of the man she had once loved, wondered whether the fog controlling his mind had lifted, whether he now understood the truth of what had happened to them both, or whether he remained convinced of her betrayal, marching toward Draven territory not to rescue her, but to destroy the enemy he believed had stolen her away. Ronan's eyes met hers across the room, something fierce and protective flashing behind his gaze. "Whatever Kaelin Vane believes, whatever intentions bring his forces toward my border," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of a king prepared for war. "He will not take you from this kingdom, against your will. That much I promise you." The certainty in his words should have offered comfort, but instead, Lyra felt only a rising dread as she realized the fragile peace surrounding her recovery was about to shatter entirely, pulling her once again into the center of a conflict between two powerful kings, each convinced they were fighting for what was right. News of the approaching Ashwood scouts spread quickly through Castle Ravenmoor. and within hours, the relaxed atmosphere that had settled over the fortress during Lyra's recovery transformed into something far more tense. Guards doubled their patrols along the walls. Messengers rode out toward neighboring villages, warning them to prepare for the possibility of conflict. Lyra watched from her chamber window as the castle around her shifted from a place of quiet healing into a fortress bracing for war, and she could not shake the feeling that she was the cause of it all. Fira visited her that evening, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a careful, guarded expression as she checked on Lyra's healing wounds. "The whole castle is talking," Fira admitted quietly, unable to hide the worry in her voice. "Word has spread among the higher-ranking guards about who you truly are. Some believe your presence here invites disaster. Others believe King Draven is a fool for risking war over a woman who does not even belong to our kingdom." The words stung, though Lyra could not entirely blame the guards for their concerns. She was, after all, a stranger within their walls, carrying the child of their kingdom's oldest enemy, and now potentially the reason their homes and families faced the threat of invasion. "Perhaps they are right to be afraid," Lyra said softly, guilt weighing heavily on her chest. "Perhaps I should leave, before more harm comes to your people because of me." "Do not say such things," Fira said firmly, surprising Lyra with the sudden intensity in her voice. "King Draven made his choice to protect you, and whatever his reasons, he does not make such decisions lightly. If he believed abandoning you was the wiser path, he would have done so already. Trust that he understands the risks better than either of us." Lyra wanted to believe Fira's reassurance, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her regardless. She thought of the innocent villagers who might suffer if war broke out between the two kingdoms, of the guards who would be asked to fight and possibly die defending walls that sheltered her, all because she had chosen to run toward Draven territory rather than face whatever fate awaited her elsewhere. That night, unable to find rest despite her exhaustion, Lyra made her way once again to the courtyard, drawn by the same restless energy that had led her there before. She found Ronan already present, though this time he was not alone in quiet contemplation. Several of his senior commanders stood around him, examining a large map spread across a stone table, their voices low and urgent as they discussed troop positions and defensive strategies. Ronan noticed her approach and dismissed his commanders with a brief nod, though the tension in his shoulders remained even as they departed. "You should be resting," he said, though his tone lacked any real reproach. "How could I possibly rest?" Lyra replied, moving closer to examine the map still spread across the table, markers indicating troop movements, scattered across the parchment representation of the border between their two kingdoms. "Knowing that my presence here has brought your kingdom to the edge of war. This conflict existed long before you arrived at my border," Ronan said, though his words did little to ease her guilt. "Kaelin Vane and I have circled each other for years, each searching for weakness in the other's defenses. Your presence merely accelerated tensions that were already simmering beneath the surface." "That is not entirely reassuring," Lyra said, managing a weak, humorless smile, despite the gravity of the situation. Ronan's expression softened slightly, and he gestured for her to sit beside him at the table, setting aside the map for a moment. "I will not lie to you and pretend there is no danger," he said honestly. "Kaelin's forces near our border, in greater numbers than typical scouting patrols would require. Whether he intends outright invasion or simply wishes to gather information about your location remains unclear. But know that I have prepared for this possibility since the moment I brought you within these walls."
"And if he does attack," Lyra asked, "what happens then?"
"How many lives will be lost defending a decision that was ultimately mine to make, running toward your kingdom, rather than facing whatever consequences awaited me elsewhere?" Ronan reached out, his hand hovering near hers for a moment, before he seemed to reconsider, pulling back slightly. "You did not choose this conflict, Lyra. You chose survival, for yourself and for your child. No one can fault you for that instinct. If war comes, the responsibility rests with those who created the circumstances forcing you to flee in the first place, not with the woman simply trying to protect her unborn pup." His words offered some measure of comfort, though the underlying dread remained firmly rooted in her chest. She studied his face in the moonlight, searching for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only steady resolve, the same quiet strength that had first drawn her attention during their encounter at the river. "Can I ask you something?" Lyra said, after a long moment of silence. "Something that has been troubling me since Fira mentioned the concerns among your guards." Ronan nodded, giving her his full attention. Why does my presence matter so much to you personally? She asked carefully. Beyond the political advantage of sheltering an Ashwood heir, beyond the leverage it might offer against Kaelin, what is it that makes you willing to risk your kingdom's safety for a woman you barely know? The question seemed to catch Ronan off guard, his usual composed expression flickering with something more vulnerable, before he carefully schooled his features back into neutrality. I have asked myself that same question many times over the past week, he admitted quietly. The political advantages are undeniable, I will not pretend otherwise, but there is something else, something I find difficult to name. He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly, and Lyra felt her breath catch at the intensity behind his gaze. When I found you at the river, broken and desperate, fighting to protect your child against impossible odds, I saw something I have not encountered in a long time. Genuine strength, not born of power or position, but of pure determination to protect something precious, despite every obstacle stacked against you. I find myself unwilling to let harm come to that strength, regardless of the political consequences. His words settled deep within her chest, stirring emotions she had not expected to feel again after the devastation of Kaelin's rejection. She had believed, in the darkest moments of her flight through the forest, that she would never again experience the warmth of genuine care from another person. That betrayal had permanently closed that part of her heart. Yet here, within the walls of her mate's greatest enemy, she found herself slowly opening to the possibility of trust once more. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to find more adequate words to express the complicated swirl of gratitude and confusion churning within her. Ronan's expression grew more guarded again, as though he had revealed more than he intended, and he rose from the bench with sudden purpose. "We should discuss practical matters," he said, his tone shifting back toward the careful authority she had grown accustomed to. "If Kaelin's forces continue advancing, we may need to consider moving you to a more secure location within the kingdom, away from the border entirely." Lyra nodded, understanding the necessity even as disappointment flickered through her at the abrupt shift away from the intimacy of the previous moment. "Whatever you believe is wisest," she said. "I trust your judgment in these matters far more than my own at this point." Over the following days, the situation along the border continued to develop with troubling speed. Ronan's scouts reported that Kaelin's forces, while not yet advancing into Draven territory directly, had established a significant presence just beyond the boundary line, clearly signaling intent without yet crossing into open conflict. The standoff created an atmosphere of unbearable tension throughout Castle Ravenmoor, every guard and servant aware that the fragile peace could shatter at any moment. Lyra found herself drawn increasingly into Ronan's confidence during this period, no longer simply a guest recovering from injury, but someone whose insight into Kaelin's character and likely strategies proved genuinely valuable to the Draven Kingdom's defensive planning. She shared what she knew of Kaelin's tactical preferences, his tendency toward calculated patience rather than impulsive aggression, information that helped Ronan's commanders anticipate potential moves before they occurred. Their working relationship deepened into something more complex during these sessions, hours spent hunched together over maps and reports, their proximity no longer feeling as fraught with tension as it once had. Lyra caught herself, more than once, admiring the sharp intelligence behind Ronan's strategic thinking, the way he considered every possible outcome before committing to a course of action, so different from the more instinctive, emotionally driven decisions she remembered from her time with Kaelin. One afternoon, as they reviewed the latest scouting reports together in Ronan's private study, Lyra felt a sudden, sharp flutter beneath her ribs, unlike anything she had experienced before. She gasped softly, her hand flying to her stomach in surprise. Ronan's attention snapped immediately to her, concern flooding his features. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Lyra said, a genuine smile breaking through the tension that had gripped her for days. "The baby." I felt the baby move for the first time. The shift in Ronan's expression was immediate and unmistakable, wonder replacing the concern that had colored his features moments before. Without fully thinking through the gesture, he reached out, his hand hovering near her stomach in silent question. Lyra hesitated only a moment before nodding, and he gently placed his palm against the gentle curve, waiting patiently for several long moments before the flutter came again, faint but unmistakable beneath his touch. Something passed between them in that moment, unspoken but undeniable, a connection neither of them had anticipated forming between an Ashwood Omega and the Alpha King of Draven. Ronan withdrew his hand slowly, his expression carefully composed once more, though something lingered in his eyes that had not been there before. "Whatever happens with Kaelin," he said quietly, "whatever conflict unfolds along our border, know that this child will be protected. That is a promise I intend to keep, regardless of the cost." Lyra found herself believing him completely, a strange and unexpected comfort settling over her despite the looming threat of war, gathering just beyond the kingdom's walls. While tension mounted along the Draven border, Edric's quiet investigation within the Ashwood Kingdom finally began yielding results that shook the foundations of everything Kaelin believed about his own court. The trail of missing herbs from the healer's private stores led, after days of careful questioning and cross-referencing of access records, to a name that struck Kaelin like a physical blow when Edric finally brought the evidence before him. "Councilwoman Vesna," Kaelin repeated, staring at the documents Edric had spread across his desk, unable to fully process the implications. Vesna Ashwood had served on his council since before his coronation, a distant cousin, whose loyalty had never once been questioned throughout his entire reign. "You are certain of this?" "The evidence is substantial," Edric confirmed grimly. "Her personal guard confirms she visited the healer's quarters alone on 3 separate occasions in the week before your rejection of Lyra, each visit conveniently unlogged in the official records. When questioned, the healer's assistant recalled seeing her handle the specific herbs, later confirmed missing from inventory." Kaelin's hands curled into fists against the desk's surface, fury building steadily beneath his controlled exterior. "Why?" he demanded. "What could she possibly gain from destroying my relationship with Lyra, from driving my mate into enemy territory?" "That remains unclear," Edric admitted, "though I have my suspicions. Vesna has long harbored ambitions for her own bloodline to inherit greater influence within the Ashwood court. With Lyra removed and no legitimate heir secured through proper means, succession would become considerably more contested, potentially opening pathways for her own children to claim greater standing." The revelation settled over Kaelin like a physical weight, the betrayal cutting deeper for having come from someone he had trusted implicitly for years. He had spent countless evenings at council meetings listening to Vesna's counsel, had genuinely valued her perspective on matters of state, never once suspecting the depths of ambition hidden beneath her composed exterior. "Bring her to me," Kaelin said, his voice dangerously quiet, the calm before an inevitable storm. "I want to hear the truth from her own mouth before I decide how to proceed." Edric hesitated. "My king, perhaps a more measured approach would serve better. If we confront her directly, she may simply deny everything, and without a full confession, our evidence, while substantial, remains largely circumstantial." "I do not care about measured approaches any longer," Kaelin snapped, the fury he had been carefully containing finally breaking through his composed exterior. "I have spent days believing myself capable of the worst possible cruelty toward the woman I love, tortured by memories I could not fully trust, while the true architect of this catastrophe sat comfortably within my own council chambers, watching the chaos unfold with satisfaction. I want answers, and I want them now." Reluctantly, Edric departed to summon the councilwoman, leaving Kaelin alone with his thoughts and the mounting rage that threatened to consume him entirely. He paced the length of his chamber, replaying every interaction with Vesna over the past months, searching for any hint of the deception he had failed to recognize, any warning sign he had carelessly overlooked. When Vesna finally arrived, escorted by 2 of Edric's most trusted guards, her expression carried the same composed dignity Kaelin had always associated with her presence, though something flickered behind her eyes when she noticed the grim set of his features and the evidence spread visibly across his desk. "My king," she said carefully, offering a formal bow. "Edric mentioned you wished to discuss a matter of some urgency." "Do not insult my intelligence with pretense," Kaelin said, his voice cutting through any pretense of civility. "I know what you did, Vesna. I know about the herbs, the visits to the healer's quarters that conveniently escaped official record. I know that you manipulated my mind, stripped away my ability to think clearly, and forced me to destroy everything I held precious." For a long moment, Vesna said nothing, her expression carefully neutral even as the accusation hung heavy in the air between them. Then, slowly, something shifted in her posture, the careful mask of loyal counselor falling away, to reveal something colder, more calculating beneath. "I did what was necessary," she finally said, her voice devoid of any remorse. "For generations, Our bloodline has served yours faithfully, while the succession consistently favored lines with weaker claims and lesser merit. Your mother chose an unworthy path when she married outside the strongest bloodlines, and I have watched for years as the true strength of this kingdom remained subordinate to lineages that offer nothing but sentiment and outdated tradition. Kaylin's blood ran cold at the venom in her words, the years of hidden resentment finally spilling into the open. So you decided the solution was destroying my relationship with Lyra, forcing her to flee into enemy territory, risking war between our kingdoms in the process. I did not anticipate she would flee so far, Vesna admitted, a flicker of something almost like frustration crossing her features. I intended only to end the relationship cleanly, to clear the path for a more suitable match, one that would strengthen the bloodlines I have spent years cultivating influence over. Her flight into Draven territory was an unfortunate complication I had not accounted for. Unfortunate complication, Kaylin repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. You call the potential loss of my child, the risk of war between two kingdoms, an unfortunate complication. Vesna's expression hardened further, any pretense of remorse vanishing entirely. The child was never meant to survive, she said coldly. I had arranged for Lyra to be intercepted shortly after her exile. Her death made to appear the work of rogue wolves along the border. With both her and the child eliminated, your path toward a more advantageous union would have been clear, and none would have questioned the tragic circumstances of her demise. The full scope of her betrayal crashed over Kaylin with devastating force. Not simply manipulation, not simply the destruction of his relationship with Lyra, but a calculated plot to murder both her and their unborn child, disguised as the random cruelty of rogue attackers. Had Lyra not managed to reach Draven territory, had Ronan not intervened at precisely the right moment, she and his child would already be dead, victims of a conspiracy orchestrated from within his own trusted council. Something inside Kaylin finally broke entirely at that revelation, the careful control he had maintained throughout his reign, shattering under the weight of pure, unrestrained fury. His eyes flashed with the barely contained power of his alpha nature, the room seeming to grow colder around him, as raw rage radiated from every line of his body. Take her to the dungeons, Kaylin commanded, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for argument, the guards immediately moving to restrain Vesna despite her attempts to maintain her composed dignity, even in the face of certain punishment. She will face judgment before the full council for treason against the crown, and for the attempted murder of the future heir to this kingdom. As the guards led Vesna away, her final words echoed through the chamber, carrying a chilling certainty that would haunt Kaylin long after her departure. You believe uncovering my involvement solves your troubles, my king. But you are mistaken. Lyra remains within Draven walls, surrounded by your enemy's forces, carrying an heir that Ronan Draven now has every incentive to claim as leverage against you. Whatever peace you imagine reclaiming her will bring, know that the true danger to your kingdom has only just begun. Kaylin stood alone in his chamber long after the guards had departed with their prisoner, the weight of Vesna's parting words settling heavily over him. She was right about one crucial fact, regardless of her treachery. Lyra remained within enemy territory, and while the mystery of his manipulation had finally been solved, the greater challenge of reclaiming his mate and unborn child from within the walls of his greatest rival's kingdom still loomed ahead. More complicated now than ever, given the political tensions already mounting along the border. Edric returned shortly after, his expression grim as he absorbed the outcome of the confrontation. What now, my king? Vesna's confession clears your name of any true betrayal against Lyra, but it does not change the current standoff at the Draven border, nor guarantee Ronan Draven's willingness to simply return your mate now that we understand the full truth. Kaylin's jaw tightened with renewed determination, the fury from Vesna's confession transforming into something more focused, more purposeful. Then, we will make him understand, he said. I will go to the border myself, and I will make clear to Ronan Draven that whatever advantage he believes he holds over me has come to an end. Lyra belongs with me, and I will not rest until she and my child are safely returned to where they belong. And if he refuses, Edric asked carefully, already anticipating the answer, even before Kaylin spoke it aloud. Then he will learn precisely why the wolves of this kingdom have feared crossing my borders for generations, Kaylin said, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a king, prepared to burn everything down, rather than accept the loss of everything that mattered most to him. I will not allow politics or pride to keep me from reclaiming what is mine, regardless of the cost to either kingdom. Word of Kaelin's approach reached Castle Ravenmoor, before the man himself did, carried by frantic scouts whose reports painted an increasingly alarming picture. What had previously been a cautious gathering of forces along the border had transformed, seemingly overnight, into a full mobilization, with Ashwood soldiers moving in numbers that suggested far more than a simple diplomatic visit. Ronan received the news in his war room, surrounded by his senior commanders, the atmosphere thick with tension, as reports continued arriving with troubling frequency. "How many?" he demanded of the scout who had just delivered the latest update. "At least 3 full battalions, my king," the scout reported, breathless from his hurried journey back to the castle. "Moving with purpose toward our eastern border. King Vane rides at the front himself, along with his personal guard." A murmur rippled through the assembled commanders, the implications clear to everyone present. This was not the cautious posturing of a king simply gathering information. This was the deliberate mobilization of a ruler, prepared to wage war for what he believed rightfully belonged to him. Ronan studied the map spread across the war table, calculating troop positions, defensive strategies, potential outcomes with the cold precision that had defined his leadership throughout years of tension with the Ashwood Kingdom. Yet beneath the calculated exterior, a different concern gnawed at him, one he was unwilling to voice before his commanders. Lyra. If Kaelin truly intended war, if the situation escalated beyond diplomatic resolution, the safety of the woman who had slowly, unexpectedly, become far more important to him than mere political leverage hung precariously in the balance. He thought of the moment in his study, her hand guiding his to feel the flutter of new life beneath her skin, the unexpected tenderness that had settled over him in that instant, a feeling he had not experienced since long before the weight of the crown had hardened his heart against such vulnerabilities. "Prepare our defenses," Ronan commanded, forcing his focus back to the immediate crisis at hand. "Full mobilization along the eastern wall. I want archers positioned along the ramparts, and I want every available soldier ready before Kaelin Vane's forces reach our border." As his commanders dispersed to execute his orders, Ronan made his way through the castle's corridors toward Lyra's chamber, his mind racing through the various outcomes this confrontation might produce. He found her standing at her window, watching the distant horizon, where, even from this distance, faint signs of approaching movement could be discerned along the tree line beyond the border. "He is truly coming," Lyra said quietly, not turning as Ronan entered the room, her voice carrying a complicated mixture of fear and something that sounded almost like longing. "He is," Ronan confirmed, moving to stand beside her at the window, "with considerable force, according to my scouts. This does not appear to be a diplomatic visit." Lyra finally turned to face him, worry etched deeply into her features. "What will you do?" "Whatever is necessary to protect my kingdom, and to protect you," Ronan said firmly. "But before matters escalate further, I intend to speak with him directly. Perhaps there remains a path toward resolution that does not require the devastation of open war." "He believes I betrayed him," Lyra said, fear coloring her voice at the memory of Kaelin's cold rejection. "Even if the manipulation controlling his mind that night has lifted, I do not know what he believes now, what conclusions he has drawn about my flight into your territory." "Whatever he believes," Ronan said, his voice softening slightly as he studied her worried expression, "know that I will not allow him to simply claim you and your child without your consent, regardless of whatever history exists between you both. This is your choice to make, not his, and certainly not mine to make on your behalf." The sincerity in his words offered some comfort, though the dread of facing Kaelin again, of confronting the complicated tangle of love and betrayal that still lingered from their shattered relationship, left Lyra's stomach twisted with anxiety. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, feeling the reassuring flutter of movement beneath her palm, a reminder of exactly what remained at stake in whatever confrontation awaited them. By late afternoon, Kaelin's forces had reached the very edge of Draven territory, their numbers arranged in formation along the border with unmistakable purpose. Ronan rode out to meet him personally, accompanied by a small contingent of his own guards, the two kings finally coming face to face, across the invisible line that had separated their warring kingdoms for generations. Kaelin's expression, when he finally laid eyes on his longtime rival, carried none of the calculated coldness Ronan had expected. Instead, raw desperation and barely contained fury warred openly across his features, the mask of composed royal authority stripped away by weeks of anguish and uncertainty. "Where is she?" Kalen demanded without preamble, his horse pawing anxiously at the ground beneath him, sensing its rider's agitation. "Safe," Ronan replied evenly, refusing to be baited into the aggressive posturing Kalen seemed intent on provoking. "Recovering from injuries she sustained while fleeing from your kingdom, though I suspect you already know the details of her condition, given the scale of forces you have brought to my border." Kalen's jaw tightened, guilt and fury tangling together behind his gaze. "I know the truth now," he said, his voice tight with barely restrained emotion. "I know that my rejection of Lyra was not my own choice, that a traitor within my own council manipulated my mind, drugged me into destroying everything I held precious. I know that same traitor arranged for Lyra to be murdered along her flight, disguised as the work of rogue attackers." Ronan's expression shifted slightly at this revelation, new understanding coloring his perception of the situation. "You are saying her exile, her flight into my territory, was not simply the result of a lover's quarrel, but part of a deliberate plot against her life?" "Yes," Kalen confirmed, bitterness lacing his voice. "A plot that very nearly succeeded, had you not intervened at the river. I owe you a debt for that intervention, Draven. Whatever our history, whatever conflicts have divided our kingdoms, you saved the life of the woman I love, and the child she carries." The admission seemed to cost Kalen considerably, the words clearly difficult for a man who had spent years viewing Ronan as nothing more than a bitter enemy. Ronan studied him carefully, weighing the sincerity behind his rival's admission against the significant military force still arrayed along the border behind him. "If your intentions are truly gratitude rather than conquest," Ronan said carefully, "then explain the battalions positioned at my border, prepared for war rather than diplomatic discussion." "I came prepared for whatever response your kingdom might offer," Kalen admitted. "I did not know whether you would return Lyra willingly, or whether you intended to use her and our child as leverage against me, as our respective histories might have suggested. I hoped for peaceful resolution, but I prepared for the possibility of conflict, should you refuse to release her." "She is not a prisoner to be released," Ronan said, his voice hardening slightly. "She came to my border seeking sanctuary, fleeing genuine danger, and I have offered her protection freely, without demand for anything in return beyond her own well-being and that of her child. Whether she chooses to return with you now rests entirely with her, not with either of us deciding her fate through the threat of war." Kalen's expression flickered with surprise, clearly not having anticipated this particular framing of the situation. "You would allow her to choose freely, even knowing the political advantage her presence within your kingdom might offer against me. I am not interested in using an innocent woman and her unborn child as a tool of political leverage," Ronan said firmly. "Whatever conflicts exist between our kingdoms, whatever ambitions I hold for the future of my people, they do not extend to exploiting the suffering of someone who came to me, seeking nothing more than safety." The two kings stared at each other across the borderline, generations of accumulated distrust and rivalry hanging heavy in the air between them. Yet something had shifted in the nature of their confrontation, moving away from the immediate threat of open warfare, towards something more measured, more uncertain in its eventual outcome. "I wish to see her," Kalen finally said, "to speak with her directly, to explain the truth of what happened, and to ask her forgiveness for the pain my actions, however manipulated, caused her to endure." Ronan considered the request carefully, weighing the risks of allowing this confrontation against the potential consequences of denying it entirely. Ultimately, he understood that Lyra deserved the opportunity to hear the truth directly from Kalen, to make her own informed decision about her future, rather than having that choice dictated by either king's assumptions about what was best for her. "I will bring her to the border myself," Ronan said finally. "But know this, Kalen Vane. Whatever she chooses, whatever path she decides to walk forward from this moment, I will respect her decision entirely. If she chooses to return with you, I will not stand in her way. But if she chooses otherwise, know that I will defend her right to that choice, with everything my kingdom possesses." Kalen nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind Ronan's words, the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted between the Draven King and the Ashwood Omega during her time within enemy walls. Something that complicated the situation far beyond simple questions of loyalty and rescue. As Ronan turned his horse back toward the castle, preparing to deliver the news of Kaelin's arrival to Lyra, a heavy sense of foreboding settled over him, an awareness that whatever happened next would irrevocably alter the fragile peace that had existed between their two kingdoms, regardless of which choice Lyra ultimately made when confronted with the truth of everything that had transpired since her desperate flight through the forest weeks before. Lyra's hands trembled as she prepared to leave the castle for the meeting Ronan had arranged at the border. Fira helped her dress in a simple gown, far removed from the elaborate silks she had worn the night of her rejection, yet somehow more fitting for the woman she had become since that devastating evening, stronger and more certain of herself despite everything she had endured. "You do not have to go," Fira reminded her gently, as she adjusted the fabric around Lyra's growing stomach. "King Draven made clear that whatever you decide, he will honor your wishes." "I know," Lyra said, steadying her breathing as she studied her reflection in the small mirror Fira held before her. "But I cannot move forward, cannot truly heal from everything that happened, without hearing the truth from Kaelin directly, without understanding exactly what occurred that night and why." Fira nodded, understanding the necessity, even as concern remained evident in her expression. "Whatever you decide, know that many of us within these walls have come to care for your well-being, regardless of where your loyalty ultimately lies." The words touched Lyra deeply, a reminder of how much her circumstances had shifted since her desperate arrival at Draven's border weeks before. She had come seeking nothing more than temporary shelter, expecting hostility and suspicion from her mate's sworn enemies. Instead, she had found genuine kindness, unexpected friendship, and a connection with Ronan that continued to complicate her understanding of her own feelings with each passing day. Ronan met her in the castle courtyard, dressed in formal attire befitting a king preparing to negotiate matters of significant consequence. His expression, when he looked at her, carried a complicated mixture of protectiveness and something more vulnerable that he quickly masked behind his usual composed authority. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly, as they walked together toward the waiting carriage that would carry them to the border. "No," Lyra admitted honestly, "but I must face him regardless. I cannot continue living in uncertainty, wondering what might have been said, what truths might have been revealed, had I simply refused this confrontation out of fear." Ronan nodded, respecting her decision, even as tension remained visible in the set of his shoulders throughout the journey toward the border. When they finally arrived, Kaelin was already waiting, flanked by his personal guard, though he had dismissed the larger battalions further back from the immediate meeting point, a gesture Ronan noted with cautious approval. The moment Lyra stepped from the carriage, Kaelin's entire demeanor shifted, raw emotion breaking through the careful composure he had maintained during his earlier confrontation with Ronan. He took several steps forward before catching himself, clearly restraining the instinct to close the distance between them entirely. "Lyra," he said, her name carrying the weight of weeks of anguish and desperate searching. "Thank the ancestors you are truly alive." Lyra studied him carefully, searching his familiar features for any trace of the coldness that had haunted her memories since that terrible night. Instead, she found only exhaustion, guilt, and genuine relief, emotions that seemed entirely authentic despite everything that had transpired between them. "Kaelin," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, given the storm of emotions churning within her. "I need to understand what happened. I need to know the truth." "I will tell you everything," Kaelin said immediately, "though I understand if my explanation does little to ease the pain my actions, however manipulated, caused you to suffer." Over the following hour, standing at the border between their two kingdoms, Kaelin recounted the full truth Edric had uncovered. Vesna's betrayal, the forbidden herbs used to cloud his mind, the calculated plot to not only destroy their relationship, but to arrange for Lyra's death, along with their unborn child, disguised as the random cruelty of rogue attackers. Lyra listened in stunned silence, the full scope of the conspiracy against her finally coming into focus. She had suspected manipulation, had sensed something wrong in Kaelin's cold demeanor that fateful night, but the revelation that someone within his own trusted council had deliberately orchestrated her murder left her shaken to her core. "She is imprisoned now," Kaelin continued, awaiting judgment before the full council for her treason. "I came here, not to reclaim you through force or obligation, Lyra, but to offer you the truth you deserved from the beginning, and to ask, humbly, whether you might find it within yourself to forgive actions that were never truly my own choice. Lyra's eyes filled with tears as the weight of everything settled over her, relief mixing with lingering hurt, understanding tangling with the complicated feelings that had developed during her time within Draven's walls. She glanced briefly at Ronan, standing a respectful distance away, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension evident in his posture. "I believe you," Lyra finally said, turning back to Kaelan. "I believe that what happened that night was not truly your own choice. But Kaelan, so much has changed since then. I have changed. The woman who once dreamed of becoming your Luna is not entirely the same person standing before you now." Kaelan's expression tightened with barely concealed apprehension. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that forgiveness, for what was done to us both, does not automatically mean returning to exactly where we left off," Lyra said carefully, choosing her words with deliberate care. "I need time to process everything, to understand my own feelings clearly, before making any decisions about our future, about the future of our child. Our child will inherit the Ashwood throne," Kaelan said, a note of urgency entering his voice. "That birthright cannot simply be set aside, regardless of whatever time you believe you need for personal reflection. Our child's birthright does not require me to abandon my own agency in this decision," Lyra replied, a flash of the strength she had discovered during her weeks of survival and recovery, evident in her steady gaze. "I have spent my entire life allowing others to make decisions on my behalf, first as a minor lord's daughter expected to marry advantageously, then as your intended Luna, expected to simply accept whatever role the kingdom required of me. I will not repeat that pattern now, not when so much has already been taken from me through no fault of my own." Kaelan fell silent, clearly struggling to process this unexpected assertion of independence from the woman he had assumed would simply return to his side once the truth of Vesna's betrayal was revealed. Ronan, watching from his position nearby, felt something complicated stirring within his chest. Pride, at witnessing Lyra's strength mixed with uncertainty about what her declaration might mean for his own growing feelings toward her. "What do you propose then?" Kaelan finally asked, his voice tight, with barely contained frustration and lingering desperation. "I propose that I remain within Draven territory for now," Lyra said, "continuing my recovery, and taking the time necessary to determine my own path forward, free from the pressure of immediate political obligations from either kingdom. When our child is born, we will discuss matters of inheritance and succession properly, with full consideration for what serves the child's best interests, not simply the political ambitions of either Ashwood or Draven." The proposal clearly was not what Kaelan had hoped for, yet the alternative, forcing Lyra to return against her explicit wishes, would only deepen the very wounds he was attempting to heal through this confrontation. He looked toward Ronan, a complicated mixture of resentment and reluctant respect passing between the two kings. "You would allow this arrangement?" Kaelan asked Ronan directly, "sheltering my mate and unborn heir indefinitely within your kingdom, without demanding anything in return?" "I have never demanded anything from Lyra," Ronan replied evenly. "She remains within my walls because she chooses to, not because I hold her there against her will. If her wishes shift, if she decides to return to Ashwood territory, I will not stand in her way." Kaelan studied Ronan carefully, searching for hidden motives behind his rival's seemingly straightforward declaration, yet found nothing but genuine sincerity reflected in the Draven King's steady gaze. Something shifted in his understanding of the situation, a grudging recognition that whatever connection had developed between Lyra and Ronan during her time within his walls extended beyond simple political convenience. "Very well," Kaelan said finally, his voice heavy with reluctant acceptance. "I will honor your wishes, Lyra, though I ask that you allow me continued contact, opportunities to demonstrate that the man who loved you still exists beneath the mistakes forced upon him by another's manipulation." Lyra nodded, relief evident in her posture at his acceptance of her terms. "I would welcome that, Kaelan, truly, but I need this time, this space, to heal properly, before making decisions that will shape the rest of our lives." As the meeting concluded, Kaelan's forces began their slow withdrawal from the border, the immediate threat of war receding into an uneasy but manageable peace. Yet as Lyra and Ronan made their way back toward Castle Ravenmoor, neither of them fully anticipated how quickly that fragile peace would once again be tested, nor how the complicated tangle of loyalty, love, and political ambition would soon draw all three of them back toward the precipice of devastating conflict. 3 weeks passed in relative calm following the border meeting, a fragile peace settling over both kingdoms as Kalen honored his promise to give Lyra the space she had requested. He sent occasional messages, carefully worded letters, expressing his continued hope for reconciliation, without pressuring her toward any particular decision, a restraint that surprised Lyra, given the desperate urgency he had displayed during their border confrontation. Meanwhile, life within Castle Ravenmore settled into a new, more comfortable rhythm. Lyra's pregnancy continued to progress, her strength fully restored from the injuries she had sustained during her initial flight. She spent her days assisting with minor administrative tasks Ronan entrusted to her keen insight into Ashwood politics proving genuinely valuable to the ongoing diplomatic dance between the two kingdoms. Her relationship with Ronan deepened further during this period, evolving from cautious alliance into something that neither of them could deny carried genuine emotional weight. They shared meals together most evenings, their conversations ranging from matters of state to more personal reflections on their hopes for the future, on the child growing within Lyra whom Ronan had come to care for with a tenderness that surprised even himself. Yet beneath this surface calm, darker currents continued moving unseen. Vesna, despite her imprisonment within Ashwood's dungeons, had not acted entirely alone in her conspiracy. A small faction of Ashwood nobles who shared her ambitions for greater influence within the kingdom's succession had begun quietly organizing, furious at her capture, and desperate to salvage what remained of their carefully laid plans. Their new scheme took shape gradually, exploiting the very peace that had settled over the border region. If they could not eliminate Lyra and her unborn child through Vesna's original plot, they would instead manufacture a crisis severe enough to reignite full-scale war between Ashwood and Draven, a conflict that would inevitably claim casualties on both sides, potentially including the very child whose birth threatened their ambitions for influence over succession. The conspirators, led by a minor lord named Corwin who had long resented his own family's diminished standing within Ashwood politics, began spreading carefully crafted rumors throughout both kingdoms, suggesting that Ronan's continued sheltering of Lyra represented not protective alliance, but deliberate manipulation, an attempt to claim the Ashwood heir as his own, through calculated seduction of a vulnerable, grieving Omega. These rumors found fertile ground among certain factions within both kingdoms, who remained deeply suspicious of the unprecedented cooperation between their traditionally warring rulers. Whispers grew louder with each passing day, suggesting that Ronan intended to raise Lyra's child, not as a legitimate Ashwood heir, but as a weapon to be used against Kalen's kingdom, once the child came of age. A Draven loyalist, wearing an Ashwood crest, as nothing more than convenient disguise. Kalen, already struggling with the painful reality of Lyra's continued distance, found himself increasingly susceptible to these poisonous suggestions, as they reached his own court through carefully placed sources loyal to Corwin's faction. Edric attempted to counsel caution, recognizing the rumors for the manufactured propaganda they truly represented, but grief and lingering insecurity made Kalen vulnerable to doubts he might otherwise have dismissed entirely. The breaking point arrived when Corwin's faction orchestrated their most dangerous move yet, staging an attack on an Ashwood trading caravan near the Draven border, carefully disguising the assault to appear as though Draven soldiers had been responsible, complete with planted evidence bearing Ronan's royal seal among the wreckage left behind. News of the attack reached Kalen within hours, delivered by messengers whose urgency left no room for careful verification before demanding immediate response. Evidence of Draven involvement, however fabricated, combined with weeks of simmering doubt about Ronan's true intentions toward Lyra, proved a devastating combination against Kalen's already fragile composure. "They have declared war upon us," Kalen raged before his assembled council, the planted evidence spread across the table before him. While professing peaceful intentions regarding Lyra's shelter, Draven forces attack our trading routes without provocation, murdering innocent merchants and stealing goods bound for our kingdom's markets. Edric studied the evidence carefully, something in the deliberate placement of the royal seal striking him as suspiciously convenient. "My king, this evidence seems remarkably tidy for a genuine attack. Might I suggest we investigate further before responding with military action?" "I have investigated enough," Kalen snapped, his patience worn thin by weeks of uncertainty and grief. "First they manipulated my mind to destroy my relationship with Lyra. Now, even after professing peace, Draven forces attack our people directly. I will not wait for further evidence while my kingdom suffers under their aggression." Despite Edric's continued protests, Kaelin's fury proved unstoppable. Decades of accumulated distrust between the two kingdoms finding renewed fuel in this fabricated provocation. Within days, Ashwood forces mobilized once again, this time with unmistakable intent for full-scale invasion rather than diplomatic confrontation. Word of the impending attack reached Ronan through his own network of scouts, the reports carrying an urgency that immediately set the castle into full defensive preparation. He summoned Lyra to his war room, the gravity of the situation evident in his tense expression as she entered. "Kaelin is marching against us," Ronan said without preamble, "believing my forces responsible for an attack on his trading caravan that I assure you, we had absolutely no involvement in whatsoever." Lyra's face paled as the implications settled over her. "This makes no sense. He agreed to give me time, to respect the space I requested. Why would he suddenly launch a full invasion based on unproven accusations?" "I suspect manipulation once again," Ronan said grimly. "Someone within his court, likely connected to Vesna's original conspiracy, appears determined to reignite our conflict through whatever means necessary." The revelation that another conspiracy might be unfolding, threatening to unravel weeks of careful peace and drag both kingdoms back toward devastating war, left Lyra reeling with disbelief and fear. She thought of the innocent lives that would be lost if full-scale conflict erupted between the two kingdoms, of the child she carried who might never know peace if this cycle of manipulation and violence continued unabated. "I must speak with him," Lyra said with sudden determination. "I must convince him to pause, to investigate properly, before launching an invasion, based on evidence that could easily be fabricated by whoever seeks to benefit from renewed war." "Lyra, if Kaelin's forces are already marching, reaching him before conflict erupts may prove impossible," Ronan said, concern evident in every line of his expression. "I cannot in good conscience allow you to place yourself in danger by attempting to intercept an army prepared for battle. I cannot simply remain here, hiding within these walls, while a war I might prevent claims countless innocent lives," Lyra insisted, her resolve unwavering, despite the very real danger such a confrontation might present. "This child deserves to be born into peace, not into the chaos of a conflict born from lies and manipulation." Ronan studied her determined expression, recognizing the same fierce strength that had first drawn his admiration during their initial encounter at the river, the same willingness to face impossible odds for the sake of protecting what mattered most. Reluctantly, he nodded, understanding that attempting to forbid her involvement would only strain the trust they had carefully built between them. "Then we will go together," he said firmly. "I will not allow you to face this danger alone, whatever the risks involved. But we move quickly, before Kaelin's forces cross too deeply into contested territory, for peaceful resolution to remain possible." As preparations began for their urgent journey toward the approaching Ashwood army, neither Lyra nor Ronan fully anticipated how dramatically the confrontation ahead would reshape not only the fate of their respective kingdoms, but the deeply personal choices each of them would soon be forced to make. Choices that would determine not just the outcome of this manufactured conflict, but the entire trajectory of their intertwined futures moving forward. The journey toward Kaelin's advancing forces proved more perilous than either Lyra or Ronan had anticipated. The roads leading toward the contested border, already showing signs of the chaos that preceded open warfare. Villages along their route stood partially evacuated, frightened families fleeing further into the kingdom's interior at the first rumors of impending conflict, while small patrols of both Ashwood and Draven scouts eyed each other with barely restrained hostility whenever their paths crossed. Ronan pushed their small escort hard, determined to reach Kaelin's forces before the two armies converged, in a clash that would prove impossible to reverse once blood had been spilled. Lyra rode beside him, her condition making the grueling pace physically demanding, yet her determination never wavered, fueled by the desperate hope that reason might still prevail before catastrophe struck. They finally spotted the vanguard of Kaelin's forces as dusk began settling over the contested border region, the sight of hundreds of armed soldiers arranged in battle formation sending a chill of dread through Lyra despite her resolve. Ronan raised a white banner as they approached, signaling peaceful intent, though the tension rippling through the assembled Ashwood forces made clear how precariously the situation balanced on the edge of eruption. Kaelin emerged from among his commanders as their small party drew near, his expression shifting from grim determination to stunned surprise, as he recognized Lyra riding alongside his rival. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, though confusion tempered the accusation in his voice. "We came to stop this war before it begins," Lyra said, dismounting despite Ronan's murmured concern about her well-being, moving forward to stand directly before Kaelin with unwavering determination. "Kaelin, please, I beg you to listen before your forces advance any further." "Listen to what?" Kaelin replied, though his earlier fury seemed somewhat tempered by her unexpected presence. "Draven soldiers attacked innocent merchants along our trading routes, leaving evidence of their involvement scattered among the wreckage. What further explanation do you require before I respond to such blatant aggression?" "The evidence was fabricated," Ronan interjected, dismounting as well to stand beside Lyra. "I give you my word as king. My forces had no involvement whatsoever in any attack against your caravans. Someone is manufacturing this conflict deliberately, exploiting the very manipulation that nearly cost you everything once already." Kaelin's expression hardened with skepticism. Convenient words from a man with every incentive to avoid responsibility for his soldiers' actions. "Kaelin," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the mounting tension, "think carefully about the timing of this attack. Weeks of peace between our kingdoms, and suddenly, immediately following weeks of careful diplomatic progress, evidence conveniently appears implicating Draven forces in an unprovoked assault. Does this not strike you as suspicious, particularly given what we already know about the conspiracy that nearly destroyed us both?" Something in her words seemed to penetrate the fog of anger that had clouded Kaelin's judgment since receiving news of the attack, a flicker of doubt entering his gaze as he processed the implications she was suggesting. "You believe this connects to Vesna's original scheme? I believe someone connected to her conspiracy remains active within your court," Ronan said, determined to accomplish through manufactured war what Vesna failed to achieve through direct manipulation and murder. "If you march your forces further into contested territory now, based on evidence that has not been properly verified, you risk playing directly into their hands." Kaelin's jaw tightened as he wrestled with the implications, decades of accumulated distrust toward Draven warring against the logical possibility that Lyra and Ronan presented. Before he could formulate a response, a commotion arose among his own ranks, one of his commanders approaching with urgent news that immediately shifted the entire situation. "My king," the commander reported breathlessly, "we have apprehended a suspicious figure attempting to flee the scene of the original caravan attack, only now discovered hiding within one of our own supply wagons. Under questioning, he has confessed to planting the evidence implicating Draven forces, claiming he was acting under orders from Lord Corwin." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the assembled forces, Kaelin's expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, cold fury, as the full scope of the manipulation became clear. "Corwin," he repeated, memory suddenly connecting scattered pieces of information he had failed to properly consider, amid his grief and desperate desire for resolution. "He has long harbored resentment regarding his family's diminished standing, Vesna's faction." "It appears so, my king," the commander confirmed grimly. "The prisoner claims Corwin orchestrated the entire attack, specifically to reignite conflict between our kingdoms, hoping the chaos of war would eliminate both the Ashwood heir and any possibility of continued alliance with Draven territory." Kaelin closed his eyes briefly, the weight of nearly launching his kingdom into devastating, unnecessary war settling over him with crushing force. He had allowed grief and lingering insecurity to make him vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation that had already cost him so dearly once before, nearly repeating the same catastrophic mistake through his willingness to believe fabricated evidence without proper investigation. "Stand down the advance," Kaelin commanded his assembled forces, his voice carrying renewed authority, despite the humbling realization of how close he had come to catastrophic error. "We will investigate this matter fully before any further military action proceeds." Relief flooded through Lyra at his decision, the immediate threat of war finally receding as reason reasserted itself over manufactured panic and grief-driven fury. She glanced toward Ronan, gratitude evident in her expression for his steady presence throughout this dangerous confrontation, his calm reasoning helping to prevent a tragedy that would have claimed countless innocent lives on both sides. "Corwin must be found and brought to justice," Kaelin continued, turning to address his commanders directly. alongside any remaining conspirators, connected to Vesna's original treason against the crown. This cycle of manipulation and manufactured conflict ends now, completely and permanently. As his commanders departed to begin organizing the search for Corwin and his co-conspirators, Kaelin turned back to Lyra and Ronan, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of gratitude and lingering vulnerability. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for preventing me from making a mistake that would have proven impossible to undo. I allowed my grief and doubt to cloud my judgment once again, nearly repeating the very pattern that already caused so much devastation." "We all remain vulnerable to manipulation when grief and fear cloud our better judgment," Lyra said gently, understanding evident in her voice despite everything she had endured because of similar manipulation directed against Kaelin previously. "What matters now is ensuring this cycle truly ends, that those responsible for exploiting our kingdom's historical animosity face proper justice." Kaelin nodded, though his gaze lingered on Lyra with evident longing, the complicated tangle of their shared history still unresolved, despite this moment of crisis averted. "Have you reached any decision?" he asked carefully, "regarding your future, now that immediate danger has passed?" Lyra glanced toward Ronan before answering, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. "I am still uncertain about many things, Kaelin, but I know this. Whatever path I choose moving forward, it must be one I select freely, based on my own understanding of what serves both myself and our child best, not one dictated by political necessity or lingering obligation from a relationship forever altered by everything that has happened." The honesty in her words, while difficult for Kaelin to hear, carried an undeniable truth that even he could not dispute. He had spent years assuming Lyra's role in his life would simply continue unchanged, her position as his intended Luna secure regardless of circumstances. Yet everything that had transpired since her exile had proven that assumption fundamentally flawed, revealing a woman of considerably more strength and independence than he had perhaps ever fully appreciated during their original courtship. As the immediate crisis resolved, and both armies began their respective withdrawals from the contested border, Lyra found herself facing the reality that the most significant choice of her future still remained ahead, a decision that would shape not only her own path forward, but the destiny of the child she carried. Caught between the legitimate claims of two kingdoms and the complicated emotions she now held for both the man who had once been her intended mate and the unlikely ally who had become something far more significant during her time of greatest need. In the weeks that followed the averted war, both kingdoms turned their attention toward rooting out the remaining threads of the conspiracy that had so nearly plunged them into devastating conflict. Corwin was captured within days, apprehended while attempting to flee toward the northern territories, his confession confirming everything the imprisoned messenger had already revealed about the elaborate scheme to manufacture war between Ashwood and Draven. The trials that followed, conducted jointly by representatives from both kingdoms in an unprecedented display of cooperation, revealed the full scope of the conspiracy's ambitions. Vesna and Corwin, along with several minor nobles who had joined their scheme, had hoped that renewed war would not only eliminate Lyra and her child, but would also destabilize both kingdoms sufficiently to allow their faction to seize greater influence amid the resulting chaos. Justice was served with appropriate severity, the conspirators stripped of their titles and sentenced to permanent exile from both kingdoms, their ambitions for power thoroughly extinguished by the very cooperation between former enemies that their treachery had failed to prevent. The joint trial itself became a symbol of the changing relationship between Ashwood and Draven, proof that generations of hostility could indeed give way to something more productive when reasonable leadership prevailed over inherited animosity. Throughout this period of justice and resolution, Lyra continued dividing her time between both kingdoms, no longer confined to Draven territory but free to move between the two courts as circumstances required, her unique position as a bridge between former enemies proving increasingly valuable to the delicate diplomatic relationship both kings worked to establish. Her relationship with Kaelin gradually healed into something new, no longer the passionate romance of their original courtship, but a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared history, complicated by lingering affection that neither fully denied nor actively pursued toward reconciliation. Kaelin, humbled by his near-catastrophic mistake in nearly launching unnecessary war, dedicated himself increasingly to rebuilding trust not just with Lyra, but with his entire kingdom, implementing reforms that reduced the concentration of power that had allowed Vesna's conspiracy to nearly succeed in the first place. Meanwhile, her connection with Ronan continued deepening into something neither of them could deny, represented far more than simple alliance or gratitude for his protection during her time of greatest need. Their shared experience navigating the crisis, working together to prevent war, and building genuine partnership despite their kingdom's complicated history, had forged a bond that felt increasingly essential to both their individual happiness and their respective visions for the future. As Lyra's pregnancy neared its final weeks, she found herself spending increasing time within Castle Ravenmoor, drawn not by political necessity, but by genuine desire to be near Ronan, whose steady presence and quiet strength had become an integral part of how she envisioned her life moving forward, regardless of the complicated politics still surrounding her situation. One evening, as autumn settled over the Draven kingdom with crisp air and golden leaves drifting past her chamber window, Lyra found Ronan waiting for her in the same courtyard where they had first shared genuine conversation months before, the fountain's gentle sound providing familiar comfort as she settled beside him on their customary bench. "I have been thinking," Ronan said carefully, uncharacteristic uncertainty coloring his usually confident demeanor, "about what comes next, once the child arrives, once the immediate crisis surrounding our kingdom's relationship has fully resolved into something more stable." Lyra studied his profile in the fading evening light, recognizing the vulnerability he rarely allowed others to witness. "What are you thinking specifically?" Ronan turned to face her directly, his expression carrying a sincerity that made her breath catch. "I am thinking that I do not wish for this connection between us to simply fade, once political necessity no longer requires our continued cooperation. I am thinking that somewhere during these past months, watching your strength, your resilience, your fierce dedication to protecting your child against impossible circumstances, I fell in love with you, Lyra Ashwood, in a way I never anticipated experiencing again, after losing my own mother to violence between our kingdoms so many years ago." The confession hung in the air between them, months of carefully suppressed feelings finally given voice. Lyra felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing her own carefully guarded feelings finally acknowledged by the man who had become so essential to her sense of safety and hope throughout the darkest period of her life. "I love you too," she admitted softly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating after everything she had endured. "I did not expect to find such feelings again. Not after everything that happened with Kaelin, not within the walls of what I once believed to be enemy territory. Yet here we are, and I cannot deny what has grown between us, regardless of how complicated our respective positions might make any future together." Ronan's expression brightened with genuine hope, though careful consideration remained evident in his thoughtful gaze. "The complications remain significant," he acknowledged. "Your child will inherit claims to the Ashwood throne, regardless of whatever personal choices we make regarding our own future together. Navigating that reality, while building something genuine between us, will require careful diplomacy, patience, and continued cooperation with Kaelin moving forward." "I know," Lyra said, "but I have learned, through everything that has happened, that allowing fear of complication to prevent genuine happiness serves no one, least of all the child I am bringing into this world. Whatever challenges our future together might present, I would rather face them alongside someone who has proven his genuine care and respect for both myself and my child, rather than allowing political convenience alone to dictate my path forward." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden, sharp pain that made Lyra gasp, her hand flying instinctively to her stomach as the unmistakable sensation of early labor began making itself known. Ronan's expression shifted immediately, from tender vulnerability to focused urgency, helping her to her feet and calling for Fira, with an authority that brought guards rushing to assist within moments. The birth that followed proved lengthy and difficult, though ultimately successful, Lyra's strength and determination carrying her through hours of labor, while Ronan remained close throughout, offering steady support despite his own evident anxiety about the process unfolding before him. Word was sent immediately to Kaelin, who arrived at Castle Ravenmoor within hours, his own anxious presence in the castle's outer halls a testament to how much he still cared for the child he had helped create, regardless of the complicated romantic situation surrounding its birth. When the pup finally arrived, a healthy girl with her mother's determined spirit already evident in her strong cries, Both kings found themselves gathered together in a moment of shared joy that would have seemed impossible mere months before, when their kingdoms had stood on the brink of devastating war. "She is beautiful," Kaelin said softly, gazing at his daughter with evident wonder and love, all traces of earlier tension forgotten in the face of new life. "What will you name her?" Lyra, exhausted but radiant with happiness, despite the physical toll of childbirth, looked between the two men who had each played such significant roles in her journey toward this moment. "Elara," she said finally, "a name that belongs to neither kingdom specifically, but represents new beginnings, the possibility of peace, built from what once seemed like insurmountable conflict." Both kings nodded their approval, the name settling over the small gathering, as fitting tribute to everything that had transpired since Lyra's desperate flight through the forest months before. In the following weeks, as Lyra recovered and little Elara grew stronger, the delicate balance of her future inheritance was carefully negotiated between both kingdoms, an unprecedented arrangement that would allow her to maintain claims to both Ashwood succession and Draven protection, symbol of the alliance now firmly established between two kingdoms that had once seemed permanently locked in conflict. Lyra ultimately chose to remain within Draven territory, her relationship with Ronan deepening into a partnership built on genuine love and mutual respect, while maintaining close diplomatic ties with Kaelin's kingdom to ensure Elara grew up understanding and connected to both aspects of her heritage. The war that had once seemed inevitable, the fire that had threatened to consume both kingdoms in devastating conflict, ultimately gave way to something far more valuable, a lasting peace, built not on conquest or manipulation, but on the courage of a woman who had crawled toward her enemy's throne, seeking nothing more than safety for herself and her unborn child, only to discover that true strength lay not in choosing sides between warring kingdoms, but in forging an entirely new path forward, one where love and cooperation could finally triumph over generations of inherited hatred and distrust. Years later, as Elara grew into a young wolf who moved freely and confidently between both Ashwood and Draven territories, beloved by both kingdoms as living proof that even the deepest conflicts could eventually give way to lasting peace, the story of her mother's desperate flight and remarkable courage became legend throughout both lands, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in fighting against impossible odds, but in having the wisdom to seek help when it is needed most, and the courage to build something new from the ashes of what once seemed like certain destruction.